Okay, I think it started. All right, so today we're going to do Genesis 29 and 30. But first we're going to recap, I guess, the previous chapters, some of the previous chapters. So previously we learned about Abraham, and then we learned about Isaac, and now Jacob. And this story that we're going to read today, this whole book, Genesis, was given to the Israelites to explain their origins, since Jacob's sons are the 12 patriarchs of the tribes of Israel. Last week we saw that when Isaac was dying, he had very poor eyesight, so he asked Esau to go out and prepare a meal for him so that Isaac can bless him after it. Rebekah overhears and then plots with Jacob to steal the blessing by deceiving Isaac and pretending to be Esau by wearing his clothes, and putting goatskin on his hands and arms so that Isaac can smell Esau because of the clothes and can feel the goatskin and think it is hairy Esau instead of smooth Jacob. This works, and Isaac does eventually give his younger son the blessing intended for Esau. This causes the prophecy from the Lord in chapter 25 to come to pass, which had said that the older would serve the younger. This causes hostility between the brothers, so much so that Esau considers killing Jacob, causing him to flee to Rebekah's family, her brother Laban in Haran. Before Jacob leaves to go to his uncle, Isaac gives him another blessing and a charge to take a wife from the daughters of Laban. Esau learns of the blessing and the commission to not take a wife from the women of Canaan, so he goes out and marries another wife, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's first son. On the way, Jacob sleeps for the night and has a dream of the ladder of heaven with angels going up and down on it. God grants him the same promise as Abraham and Isaac, with a multitude of descendants in the promised land. When Jacob awakens, he sets up a pillar to the Lord and names the place Bethel. There he makes a vow that if the Lord keeps him safe and provides for him, and brings him back to the land of his father, then the Lord will become his God. The place that the pillar is set up will be God's house, and Jacob promises to give 1/10 of everything he has to the Lord. Okay. We should have done the Bible React thing for who wants to read and participate. Let me clear those reactions, and then you guys can react. Okay, see us. Please go to that channel and react with the hedge emoji. The hedgehog emoji. If you want to be called on for reading and for, mostly just for reading. Go ahead, I already deleted all the reactions. Alright, so let me see. The first person I saw was Trinity. So Trinity, could you read chapter 29, verse 1 to 20?
Okay. Chapter 29, verse 1 to 20. Okay. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the sons of the east. He looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it, for from that well they watered the flocks. This is NASB 1995, by the way. Now the stone on the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, they would then roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "We know him." And he said to them, "Is it well with him?" And they said, "It is well. And here is Rachel his daughter coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered." And they rolled the stone from the mouth of the well. Then we watered the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban his mother's brother, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. Jacob told Rachel that he was a relative of her father, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. So when Laban heard the news of Jacob his sister's son, he ran to to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he related to Laban all these things. Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh," and he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than to give her to another man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her.
Awesome, thank you. So, this section that we just read is about Jacob coming to Laban and Haran providentially through God's providence and establishes the setting for the next couple chapters. So we see in verse 1. I'm going to go verse by verse. Yes, thank you for reading, Trinity. I'm going to go verse by verse and or a couple verses by couple verses and try to explain things from it. So in verse 1, we see that the Hebrew is literally, he picked up his feet and went. So, which is like kind of, tries to convey that he was like really excited. And this makes sense because of what God told him, the promise God told him in like the previous chapter. I guess many people would be very excited from that. And yeah, so in verse 2, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it, for out of that well the flocks were watered. So a well is finding wells is a common theme. It's like many times accompanied with other blessings from God. And here are some other um, areas or places where wells were accompanied by blessings and good things. In verse 3 is a kind of like a side note explaining the current custom because so that people understand what is going on. So people understand more about like the purpose or what the next few verses are trying to say. In verse 4, we find that they are in Haran. We remember that Abraham's servant was led there providentially to Haran, to Laban's house for Isaac's wife Rebekah, and then again, Jacob is providentially led to Haran as well, to Laban's house again. In verse 7, we see that Jacob is giving unsolicited advice, which sounds also like a command. Oops. Let me paste that. Behold, this high day is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them. So, like verse 3 told us the custom at the time. Verse 7 is Jacob giving this unsolicited advice, which kind of sounds like a command as well, telling the shepherds how to do their job. This kind of foreshadows his skill and knowledge in shepherding, that we'll see later that he's good at it. And this also portrays Jacob as bold to give this advice to shepherds, professional shepherds basically. And if the advice is good, then it also conveys like Jacob as industrious, and while the shepherds are lazy. Yes, it does seem like a command. Let me see if anyone said anything. Okay. All right, in verse 12, we see that when Rachel heard who Jacob was and where he was from, she ran and told her father, just like Rebekah did in chapter 24 with Isaac, when Abraham's servant went to get Rebekah for Isaac. And in verse 14, Laban accepted Jacob almost as a son, and which kind of sets the scene that this starts out really well. He's very well accepted. He finds the well. Everything's going well providentially. Even Laban is very open and accepting of Jacob. In verse 18, we see that Jacob offered to work for 7 years for Rachel. 7 years is a pretty. It was in his. Yes. So yeah, he offered to work for 7 years for Rachel, which is a huge bride price. But some commentators say that it's kind of understandable because he had nothing, and he was also like running away from home basically. So it's kind of understandable, but still, it there's a bit of consensus that it is a pretty high bride price. And back then, if you guys don't know, back then like a bride price is back then it was custom for the husband to for the husband for the man to pay a bride price to the woman's parents to be able to marry her. And then in verse 19, lame, yes. In verse 19, we see that it's Laban's reply already. We can see a little bit about his like sneakiness in there because it's not an explicit acceptance of the agreement of the proposal. He's like, it's not. Yes, agree. I like. Yes, he's not saying deal. He's saying, yeah, it's better. It is better if I give her to you, in a kind of a way. Stay with me. Some commentators do view this as a explicit agreement, but the "stay with me" part as an explicit agreement. But it seems more likely that it is. A little bit of his deception to already showing. Where are we? In verse 20, yes, very sus already. In verse 20, it says that 7 years he served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. So like 7 years seems like a few days. It's very difficult to imagine. This does not necessarily mean that the time went so fast, but the main point is that it was worth it the whole time. Yeah, Laban like Jacob smushed him, like want him to leave. Yes, it could have also been custom at the time. People were supposed to be extremely hospitable, especially to family, distant family, coming from faraway places. People are extremely hospitable. You're talking about the Laban's response in verse 19. Yeah, but so far he's only been there a month in verse 19, so it might not have been that Laban could have seen that Jacob was already prospering Laban's possessions. But yeah, it could be that he wanted Jacob to stay. Yeah, he could see that. Yeah, it's very possible that Jacob, his work ethic was already showing, because based on what the verse was trying to convey, that another commentators say that in the verse where Jacob was saying, "Go water the sheep," it was showing that he was industrious. Yes, that is a good point, Beget. Also to note, that's for 7 years of work to be worth it. He must have felt very intense, passionate love for a woman, which is not portrayed negatively. So, it's not the case that feeling this kind of strong, passionate love for a human is wrong, but you have to do it always thinking to honor God. Not just any woman or every woman you see or the first woman you see. It's for someone that you are interested in marrying, not just some random woman that you just. It's not infatuation. This is actual love. And the wording "a few days" it felt like a few days echoes Rebecca telling Jacob to go to Laban's for a few days. All right. Does anybody want to read? Hold on. Who else reacted? 3 people. Abe. Okay, Abe. Could you read chapter 29, verse 21 to 30?
Let me just pull it up right here.
Sure.
Genesis 29, 21.
Yes, 21 to 30.
Okay. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to be his daughter Rachel to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years.
Awesome, thank you. What version was that, by the way?
ESV.
Awesome, thank you.
Um,
That's an okay translation. I just like to mentally keep tabs on what translations people like. I'm bad with birthdays, but I'm good with translations. So anyway, so the summary, I guess, Laban deceives Jacob to marry off both daughters for a larger bride price each, and also to keep prosperous Jacob for longer. In verse 21, we see, then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Jacob says my wife instead of Rachel, which helps Laban a tiny bit with the deception, but still it's not, obviously not, doesn't justify, doesn't excuse anything, doesn't excuse Laban's deception and dishonesty, but it leaves a little bit of like room for Laban to say, yeah, well, she said my wife instead of Leah. In verse 23, in order for this to have happened, right, in order for Jacob or Laban to be able to have tricked Jacob that way, it's either what Leah was extremely drunk as well as Jacob was, or she went along with the deception. Because they had just had a wedding feast for Jacob and Rachel, and so Leah obviously knew that the wedding feast was for Jacob and Rachel. Yet if she wasn't as drunk as Jacob and wasn't completely tricked like Jacob was, then she went along with the deception and went into Jacob and went along with the deception willingly. And if she did go along with it, then it's not a good start, I guess, to the eventual co-marriage between Jacob and Leah and Jacob and Rachel. Also, we see that poor Rachel was not allowed to consummate the wedding she had just had with Jacob that night. She had to wait a week and was the second wife, So they just had a wedding, a feast. Sister wives, yeah, they just had a wedding and a feast, celebrating the wedding of Jacob and Rachel, and then Laban prevented Rachel from going into the tent afterwards. That must have been like terrible. Verse 25. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Some translations use an exclamation mark. The Young's literal translation uses lo. So I guess what the translators are trying to convey was that this was a complete surprise to Jacob. Verse 26. Laban said, "It is not good. It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." Maybe I should go a little slower to allow people to type. No. So what happened was, I guess it was a custom at the time that he had a week honeymoon. Basically, I don't. It wasn't. It probably wasn't the exact same thing as a honeymoon, but I guess you can see it that way. The custom at the time was to, you got married to someone and then you spent a week with them doing honeymoon things with them, and then basically, after that week was over, that honeymoon week was over, then Laban also gave Rachel to Jacob immediately after that week was over. But then Jacob still had to work an additional 7 years. So he did get Rachel at the beginning of the 7 years. He got Leah at the end of the first 7 years, and Rachel, at the beginning of the next 7 years to pay for her. Where was I? It was 26. Oh yeah. So verse 26. this it was not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. It probably reminded Jacob of his own. Yeah, yeah, definitely. This probably reminded Jacob of his own deception, switching the younger Jacob with the older Esau to steal the blessing. In verse 28, we see that Jacob made no comment, or no, like, he did not fight back. Which some commentators say that this was because this was from God. This judgment was from God. So I guess kind of a strange question. Based on what you know now of God's righteousness, and using today's culture, what do you think the correct course of action should have been after Jacob woke up and realized things? After he like woke up and realized it was Leah, what do you think the correct course of action should have been? Yes, but assuming after he woke up and he realized, oh Mo, I consummated with Leah. What is the correct course of action? According to what we know from God's righteousness, in today's culture. I guess yeah, how do you not notice that before? I don't know. I mean, it's like, they didn't have lights. It was like very, very dark. I guess still though. How do you not notice that? Yeah. Yeah. I'll give a little bit more time for people to finish typing. Yes. That is correct for course of action. To keep Leah, forget about Rachel, and eats taco. I agree with that, yeah. Remain with Leah and forgo Rachel. And later we'll see that if he had done that, like, Leah would turn out to be the faithful and honest and less belligerent wife. Yes, that is. I agree to beget. Verse 29. I have a little thing. Laban gave his female Bilhah to daughter Rachel, and Zilpah was Leah's maid. I have a little picture. I guess if you ever want to like memorize whose maid was whose, I made a little thing. This is what I imagine every time I want to remember. Leah, Zilpah. See the letter L, and like the beginning of Zilpah kind of looks like an L. If you like, it has like a and the beginning of Bilhah kind of looks like an R. So that's what I used to remember which maid was whose. LZRB. Yeah. If you look at the little black part, or the colors of the first letters. As long as you remember the rule, the first letters are similar, then you can like figure out every time. Landing zone, running back. Yes, that would work too. That require, yeah, okay. All right, so who else reacted? It was Tia. Tia, could you read chapter 29, 31, starting at 31, all the way to chapter 30, 24?
Can you repeat the last part?
Chapter 29, verse 31, all the way to chapter 30, verse 24.
Okay. This is the NKJV version.
All right.
When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has surely looked on my affliction, now therefore my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." And she called his name Simon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said,
Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name will be called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, Now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Now Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children. Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, Am I in place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? So she said, Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, so that I also may have children by her. Then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob's son. Then Leah said, A troop comes, so she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher. Now Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, Please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to him, It is a small matter that you have taken away my husband. Would you take away my son's mandrakes too? And Rachel said, Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came out of the field in this evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, You must come in me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has given me my wages, because I have given my mind to my husband, my meat to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a son in the immense. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph, and said, The Lord shall add to me another son.
All right, thank you very much. That was a long one, a long section. All right, so this section is about how Jacob's sons and the tribes of Israel came to be. Wow, 21 kids, nice. Okay, in verse 31, we see that Leah was the unloved one, but brought Jacob more blessing. Some translations say she was hated. In the Bible, hated sometimes means less preferred relative to something else. So yeah, some translations like the ESV and the, I think the in the Young's literal translation they use hated instead of unloved. And yeah, that doesn't mean that she was actually hated, like he hated her. That means sometimes it's used as like less preferred. Leah's first son is Reuben, which means behold a son, meaning behold a son, and says Yahweh has seen my affliction, and now my husband will love me. Her second son, Leah says, because Yahweh has heard and I am hated, he has given me a son, Simeon, which means heard. Is Simeon, which means heard. For her third son, Leah again wants the affections of her husband, joined to her, and names him Levi, which means joined. With Leah's fourth son, her focus is finally solely on God. She says she will praise Yahweh, naming her son Judah, and stops bearing for now. Judah transliterated looks like this, and In many places in the Bible, these like 3-letter combinations is used in expressing praise and thanksgiving to God. So, yes, I thought that was interesting. With this name, she was trying to give she has given up trying to win Jacob's love with childbearing and turned to God as her only consolation. So as we see with these 4 names, Leah, the unwanted wife, is like naming her children like in very faithfully, like that it like reveals her faith towards God. In immediate contrast, in verse 1, let me see Genesis. Oops. In immediate contrast, we see Rachel. Rachel immediately blames Jacob, I guess, for not having children, she doesn't go to God as and to ask for children. She just immediately gets angry and blames God, or blames Jacob. I mean, Jacob's anger in verse 2 shows that Jacob was actually like implying like, Jacob, it's your fault, and somehow that Jacob has, I don't know what that in post, somehow that Jacob has power to make children come. I shall help. Thank you, Matt. In verses 6 to 8. I can copy paste it. In verses 6 to 8, let me get those. Rip. In verses 6 to 8, we see the naming of 2 new children. Rachel declares that God has judged my case and heard my voice, naming him Dan, which means judge. And then with her second son, Rachel says, I have wrestled with... These are sons through Bilhah, not Rachel's son, like not Rachel's biological sons, but through Bilhah. With her second son through Bilhah, Rachel says, I have wrestled with my sister and prevailed, naming him Naphtali, which means a wrestling. Thank you for whoever posted that. Oh, it was a bot. Rachel's child names are not reflective of any faith in God that Leah had when naming her children. They're more like, relative to Leah, more like worldly, I guess. In verse 9, we can see rivalry and disunity. We can see rivalry and disunity. Already Leah also was brought into this rivalry and disunity, using now Zilpah because she had stopped bearing. Leah sees that she isn't bearing anymore and has Zilpah, her maidservant, given to Jacob as a wife. She bears Gad as Leah declares, how fortunate. Next, Zilpah had Asher, which means happy, and Leah says women will call her blessed. In verse 14 is interesting. We see mandrakes. Give me some of your sons mandrakes. So Rachel, mandrakes were believed to be aphrodisiacs. Here, this is a little blurb from Wikipedia about mandrakes. I'll read it. Because mandrakes contain deliriant, hallucinogenic tropane alkaloids, and the shape of their roots often resembles human figures, they have been associated with magic rituals throughout history. So we see Rachel interested in buying these pagan things, probably because it's considered an aphrodisiac, and also because she might have been interested in their pagan associations as well, to try to like divine or something. I don't know. And then we also see that she kind of like uses her husband. She pays with time with her husband. She pays Leah with time with her husband, which is very strange. Rachel is not acting very godly, while Leah has been very good so far. In verses 18 to 20, we see God hears Leah and gives her another child as a reward for giving her maidservant to her husband to sleep with, Issachar, which means there is recompense. Finally, Leah has her last son, Zebulun, saying, God has bestowed on me... Yes, Jacob fell in love with a pagan. Finally, Leah has her last son, Zebulun, saying, God has bestowed on me this gift. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have given him 6 sons. Leah's last child is Dinah, which means judgment. Yes, Matt has a point. The girl that Jacob was very attracted to and in love with. You know, she turned out to be not really godly, very, a little bit belligerent. She didn't, she turned out to be barren for a long time, and even though she was the prettier one. And Leah was the one that had was less pretty, was the one that would have been the much better wife. She was very godly and faithful and bore lots of children. Yes, she eventually stole idols and lied about it. Yes. Oops. Finally see it right. We finally see Rachel a little bit repenting a little bit when she says, "May the Lord add to me another son." When she has Joseph, because his name means he will add and he takes away, meaning that he will add children and blessing to her and take away her reproach. Not patient. This is a little family tree that I found, so you can have. Yes, yeah. All right, let me see who else reacted. All right, we're back to Trinity. Trinity, could you read chapter 30, 25 to 36? Oh, doggy's barking. All right, we'll go to Abe. Could you read chapter 30, 25 to 36?
Yes, I will read. What is it again? It's
Genesis 30,
chapter
25.
30.
Yep, 25 to 36.
Okay. Uh, as soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it." Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now when shall I provide for my own household also?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen." Laban said, "Good, let it be as you have said." You said 34, right?
36.
Oh, but that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, so verse 27, we see that Laban was trying to mix the Lord with pagan things by saying he used divination to learn the things the Lord is doing. And in verse 30, we see Jacob agreed with Laban that he was blessed, that Laban was blessed by God because of Jacob. Yes, that's unfortunate. In verse 32, paste these. In verse 32, we see Jacob asked for the rare animals that had spots or other marks on their fur as his payment. And this is a way that he could prove his honesty in the future. So Laban would not be able to say, "Hey, you stole things from me. it would be extremely obvious. Like, no, I didn't steal anything from you. I'll look through my flocks, and if there's any that are not speckled or spotted, then I did steal. But you would be able to. You would be able to point to it. But if you can't point to it, then I didn't steal. Laban agreed for this, but then again, Laban tried to steal and cheat Jacob out of what he was due, and removed all the animals that would have been Jacob's. He gave them to his sons, and his sons brought them really far away. And yes, again, Jacob is trying to cheat Jacob out of what is his. Matt, could you read verse 30 or chapter 30, verse 37 to 43, the rest of the chapter?
Oh, sure. 1 second. Let me pull up my Bible app.
No worries.
And you said chapter, let me see, chapter 30, you said?
Yes.
And which verse do you want me to start at? Just verse 1?
37 to the end of the chapter. It's very little.
37. Oh, okay. 37. I'm reading from the NASB, as usual. 27. But Laban said to him, "If it now pleases you, stay with me. I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account." He continued, Name me your wages, and I will give it." But he said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your cattle have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased to a multitude. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again pasture and keep your flock. Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black one among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And such shall be my wages." What verse did you want me to read to again, Doc Ben?
The rest,
Sorry,
the end of the
short-term memory.
chapter.
Okay, thank you. Short-term memory loss.
No worries.
So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come concerning my wages. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen. Laban said, "Good, let it be according to your word." So he removed on that day the striped and spotted male goats, and all the speckled and spotted female goats, everyone with white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the care of his sons. And he put them a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Then Jacob took fresh rods of polypur and almond and plane trees, and peeled white stripes in them, exposing the white which was in the rods. He set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the gutters, even in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink. And they mated, and they came to drink. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the rods brought forth striped and speckled and spotted. Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the stripes, and all the black in the flocks of Laban. And he put his own herds apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Moreover, whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the sight of the flock in the gutters, so that they might mate by the rods. But when the flock was feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. So the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks and female and male servants, and camels and donkeys.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we see in verse 39, it's interesting. Laban means white. The name Laban can be translated white. So basically, the wordplay here is that the text is trying to say Jacob played the Laban game, and we see later that he won. No worries. It sounded well. It sounded good, Matt. This scheme that Jacob did was trying to influence how the animals bore offspring. It's later revealed that God, in verse 31, or chapter 31, it's later revealed that God caused the offspring to all be spotted and streaked and speckled. It wasn't due to Jacob's breeding method, because I don't, from my knowledge, I don't think this breeding method would work. But it was, but the point is that God still blessed Jacob despite his dishonest efforts, because of the promise that God had made to him in Bethel. Are there any questions about anything that we read today?
I actually was wondering about the whole spotted and speckled thing, like if there was any correlation to that. Kind of like what you brought up with the mandrakes there. Like I was curious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I didn't do much research on breeding methods of these animals, but I highly doubt it that, like, where they bred would have affected, like, genetics. It's
Yeah,
possible.
it
Maybe it's
sounded like
possible, but it sounded just like some superstitious or thing, or like old wives' tale or whatever.
yeah, it sounds more like they added it to the water or something like almond plants or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah. Um, other than that, I guess my question would be, Nope, okay, I don't have any questions.
Good. Yes, I usually ask for questions, comments, or concerns. Anybody have them? Any of them? This is one of the only Bible studies that you can actually voice a concern. Has Jacob been striving with God for a long time? Or struggling? No questions? Oh, yeah, no. If there are no any questions, anybody? I'll wait a little bit for people to stop typing or to finish typing. Yes. Yep. That's where it was revealed that um, God still blessed Jacob, and despite Jacob's dishonesty, because I do think it was dishonest for him to try to influence. I think from the agreement they had, it sounded like. What do you guys think? But from the agreement they had, it sounded like it should have been some natural thing. Like, Jacob should have just tried to allow them to naturally breed, and the ones that naturally came out spotted and speckled were Jacob's. And so it was, even though it does nothing, even though I feel like this breeding method Jacob tried to do was completely ineffective. I think it was still he had dishonest intent to try to force them to come out speckled and spotted, despite what the agreement sounded like. What do you guys think? Was what Jacob did? His special breeding method, was it like dishonest and sinful, or was it fine?
I agree with you. I think that it sounded more like, all right, Laban, all the sheep that come out as spotted and speckled, I'll keep those, and you can keep the ones that are not that way. But instead, Laban, like, doesn't the part that confused me is Laban like taking all the spotted and speckled sheep away?
Yes.
3 days journey from, and they were supposed to be Jacob's, but he hid them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Laban's not good uncle, bad uncle,
Yes.
bad, and what? Yeah, then basically Jacob and Laban are both very similar. They're both deceptive. They're both like trying to manipulate things for their own greatest advantage. And
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think that was probably wrong. I think Jacob should have just been content whatever his
Yeah.
lot was.
God would have blessed them anyway, I think.
Yeah, like he should have been content with Leah. He should have been content with the sheep he got. He should have just been content, but he seemed very like he wanted Rachel, so he just stuck with trying to get that to happen.
Mhm.
Or he wanted more sheep or he wanted whatever. It's just like I don't know. It just seems like he should have like what do you call it? Just been at peace, been trusting the Lord, not tried to make his life into something like I don't know. It's odd because it's like you see his perspective, but you also see the divine perspective of from the womb. God said the younger will the older will serve the younger. So yeah.
Eye for an eye. What do you is this in relationship? The eye for an eye thing is in regards to civil proceedings, not like personal relations between personal things between people. Is more for civil proceedings. But what are you speaking? Why are you bringing that up? I don't think so. Like probably not all of the ones that the Israelites had eventually. Hello, Michi. Let me find the verse. Okay. Uh-oh. Are there any final questions or comments or concerns? Abraham obeyed my voice. Yes, my laws. It doesn't necessarily mean, the Israelite laws that they later had. It could have been like natural laws that God wrote in his heart and stuff like that, or stuff that God told him explicitly. It doesn't law. I feel like law here does not necessarily mean the laws that the Israelites kept, because there was no temple. That all those laws couldn't have been kept. Circumcision.
No, no, no. Don't star it. Did I spell it wrong? No, no. No. Why did you star it? Why?
All right. Are there any? No worries, Maki. Thanks for hanging out and coming. Any? Eye for an eye wasn't a thing yet. Yeah, wasn't a thing yet. Maybe it was explicitly told to Abraham, but again, eye for an eye was like a civil thing. It's not. If my friend comes and steals like my shoe, I'm supposed to go to his house and also steal his shoes. It's like
Right.
It's like if he comes and steals my shoes, then I bring it to the magistrates, and they are supposed to judge eye for an eye.
hmm I'm thinking.
Yes.
Oh, I have a question
Okay.
for the people. So, if you were Jacob at any point in the story and you could only make one decision different, what decision do you think you'd make different?
Ooh, nice.
Absolute silence. Oh, people are
Silence.
thinking. Nothing.
No.
What is wrong with you people? Okay, God,
No.
God,
I don't think Matt is asking like how would you change the Bible? Just like how would you decide?
have made better decisions,
Yes.
life choices. Like you're Jacob.
Address
You're
like Esau.
yeah.
Not put goat's hair on your arms.
That is a good like balance point though. So like obviously there are decisions, but it's like God providentially worked in spite of it, through it, by it, kind of like with Joseph, and brought forth His perfect will. But still, we're not God. We don't see that perspective. We don't know that perspective. So it's like we have to, as people, make God honoring decisions to the best of our abilities. So that's why I try to ask that question so people can think like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how can we apply this to our lives and realize
That's a good one.
how can we not make mistakes that Jacob made, even though God worked providentially in spite of and through it all, but still, how can we not make the same mistakes? Obviously, yeah, he was. That's true too. Why are you people bringing out all the redemptive qualities? I'm trying to make a sharp point that he made bad life choices. And you're all like, look how God redeemed it. So spiritual. I think if I was Jacob at any point in the story, you know, I actually don't know what I'd have done different. Because there was a lot of mistakes he made, a lot of deception, a lot of foolishness, a lot of bad choices. I would technically be overwhelmed if I had to just pick one decision to do different. Maybe I guess if for him, like if I was him, I would have just married just Leah and just been like, no concubines, no other wives. Thank you, that's good. Because then Leah would have been like a really faithful wife to him and been able to like just be there for him. I think that would have been good. I mean, and then he could have like that could have altered his other decisions, like with deceiving. Like maybe she could have been a good influence on him deceiving Laban and stuff. I mean, I don't know. Consult God first. That's a good choice. That's a good choice. Of course, not stealing the birthright in the first place would have been good, but yeah, that's actually some good points there, people. Good points.
Yeah.
And thank you, Dogman, for leading us all. You did a good job.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any last questions, comments, or concerns? If not, I will end the recording and then we can pray. Okay. I'm going to end the recording.